When your own child signs a Do Not Resuscitate order with your name on it, something inside you breaks in a way that never fully heals. I remember lying there, unable to move, listening to the doctor explain the risks, while a voice I once trusted insisted I was not worth saving. In that instant, fear was not the worst part. The worst part was knowing the betrayal came from the person I had loved most. Survival became more than staying alive. It became reclaiming the truth of my own worth, one breath at a time. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Beatrice Langley, though most people in Cape Cod have called me B for as long as I can remember. At 72, I live alone in the shingled New England house that my late husband Frank and I bought nearly 4 decades ago. The place carries his presence in every board and every sun-washed corner. The floors still creak the way they did when he returned from his morning walks, and the scent of the sea drifts in each dawn the same way it did when we first opened the windows together. I spend my mornings wandering the shoreline, letting the Atlantic wind push through my hair as if it is reminding me that I am still here, that time has not taken me completely. Inside the house, everything holds a memory. The framed photographs along the hallway show our wedding day, our first sail on the small wooden skiff he adored, and the proud moment I became a high school principal. His favorite fountain pen rests in a glass case he built for me one Christmas. I often touch the case without opening it, the way one visits a grave with words but not hands. My life now revolves around quiet rituals, reading, tending the small herb garden he planted, visiting the library to help children who struggle with reading. The people at the cafe down the street always greet me by name, and I enjoy the familiarity of their warm voices. My financial life, on the other hand, is far less sentimental. Frank was wise, meticulous, and determined to ensure I would never want for security. Between his estate, our longtime investments, and the growth they generated, I now oversee more than $30 million. Each month, I meet with my attorney to review documents, trusts, and long-term planning. It is not the sort of wealth one flaunts in a sleepy coastal town, but it is enough that I take great care in protecting it. Claire, my daughter, is 48 when she returns to Massachusetts after a bitter divorce that drained whatever savings she once had. She carries herself with polished elegance, but beneath that surface I see tension, something restless and unsettled hiding behind expensive perfume and perfectly styled hair. I have loved her all my life, yet I can no longer ignore the small signs of distance that grew between us in the years she lived away, the forgotten calls, the strained holidays, the way she avoids questions that require honesty. Still, I welcome her with open arms, telling myself that family deserves grace, even when grace feels heavy. One quiet afternoon, she arrives at my door with a man named Ethan Cole. He is handsome in a predictable way, with a practiced smile that seems rehearsed rather than spontaneous. He introduces himself as an independent financial consultant. His handshake is firm, yet his eyes flick past mine toward the interior of the house, lingering on the framed photographs and eventually the locked office door where I keep my records. Claire beams with pride, as if presenting a prized possession rather than a partner. I cannot decipher whether her excitement is genuine affection or the relief of having someone who can fix what is broken in her life. During our conversation, Ethan asks subtle questions about how I manage the property, whether I handle my accounts alone, and how often I review my estate plan. His tone is polite, But something beneath the surface pricks the edges of my awareness. Claire interrupts often, offering explanations I did not ask for, smoothing over his inquiries as if guiding the entire exchange. When they finally leave, walking down the stone path toward the driveway, I remain on the porch. The wind rises sharply, rustling the hydrangeas that line the fence. I cannot name the feeling that settles in my stomach, but I know it is real. Something has shifted in my home, and I can sense that the calm I have built may not hold for long. If you're still watching and this opening pulled you in, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. The morning after Claire introduced Ethan to me, I found myself replaying the entire meeting while I worked through my routine. I tried to give both of them the benefit of the doubt, yet something inside me would not settle. By the time I finished breakfast, I understood I needed to examine what had bothered me so much. Later that afternoon, Claire returned with Ethan, and the way she presented him felt overly polished, as if she had rehearsed the introduction. She described him as an independent financial consultant who had helped many people reorganize their assets and simplify complicated estates. He smiled warmly as she spoke, but I noticed how carefully he watched my reactions, as if my approval were a puzzle he needed to solve. We sat in the living room, and while the conversation began politely enough, it shifted in a direction that put a weight on my chest. Ethan asked questions that were far too pointed for a first visit. He wanted to know how often I reviewed my will and whether I had considered restructuring certain accounts. He inquired about the charitable donations I had planned to include in my estate and how frequently I met with my attorney. Claire jumped in each time I hesitated, filling the silence with explanations about reducing tax burdens or minimizing legal complexity. I felt as though I was being guided through a conversation I had never agreed to have. When they left, the house settled into a stillness that felt heavier than usual. I sat alone in the fading light, thinking about the way Claire had seemed almost eager for Ethan to hear details about my finances. She had never taken interest in that part of my life before. I opened my notebook and wrote down every detail I remembered, including the uneasy feeling that sat like a small stone in my stomach. That night, when the house was quiet, I searched for Ethan online. I expected to find a professional portfolio or at least a simple business listing. Instead, I found almost nothing. No company website, no professional associations, no verifiable licenses. The more I searched, the stronger my unease became. A financial consultant with no digital footprint was not a financial consultant I could trust. By the next morning, I made a decision I had not made lightly. I contacted Rosa Delgado, a private investigator known in town for her work uncovering fraud and financial abuse. She chose a small coffee shop near the harbor for our meeting. Rosa arrived wearing a dark jacket and carried an air of quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the room once before she sat down, and I sensed immediately that she was the right person for this task. I told her everything I had observed, every instinct that had whispered in the back of my mind. Rosa listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. She agreed to investigate Ethan, not only his background but his daily activities and any financial connections that might reveal his intentions. When we parted ways, she assured me she would move quickly. A few days later, she called and asked if we could meet in person. Her voice carried a weight that made my pulse quicken. We met again in a more private space, and she placed a thick folder on the table between us. Even before she opened it, I knew the contents would confirm the fear I had tried to dismiss. "There is something you need to see," she said. My fingers closed tightly around the edge of my chair. I told myself to breathe, to remain calm, but my heart had already begun to race. Whatever lay in that folder would change everything, and I could feel it long before a single page was revealed. If you're still watching and feeling the tension building, comment number 2 below to let me know you're following closely. Now, get ready for chapter 3. I remember the way Rosa closed the blinds before she even sat down, as if someone might be watching through the slats. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, steady but strange, like the room itself was holding its breath. When she placed the thick folder in front of me, my chest tightened. I had expected suspicion, maybe a few inconsistencies, but not the weight of something that felt like a detonator waiting to be triggered. I could feel the gravity of what she was about to reveal before she even opened her mouth. Her voice was low, almost reluctant, as if she wished she did not have to tell me what she had discovered. Inside the folder were documents that stripped away Ethan's entire identity. He was not a financial consultant. He had never worked for any investment firm he mentioned. Rosa had tracked down every credential he had claimed and found nothing but dead ends. Several names appeared in his history, all tied to small but sophisticated financial scams that targeted elderly people with substantial retirement funds. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the papers, seeing the pattern spelled out in cold, unforgiving ink. What hurt more than Ethan's lies was Rosa's next revelation. She slid a second envelope toward me, and inside were photographs of Claire and Ethan together months before she introduced him as someone new she had met after her breakup. There were receipts showing that Claire had paid his rent during that time, bank transfers with her signature, messages where she reassured him that I would be an easy transition once he earned my trust. Those words burned my eyes. I had spent years trying to help my daughter rebuild her life after her marriage fell apart, only to learn she had used my generosity as leverage to guide a stranger toward my savings. The betrayal was not sharp like a stab wound. It was slow and crushing, like a heavy beam settling on my chest. Part of me searched desperately for a reasonable explanation, something that meant Claire had been tricked or forced. But the documents made it clear she had participated willingly. The realization hollowed me out in a way I had not known was possible. As days passed, their behavior at my house shifted. Ethan would linger too long near my desk, pretending to admire framed photographs, while his eyes scanned for anything valuable. Claire repeated phrases about optimizing taxes or consolidating accounts, phrases that sounded rehearsed. They visited more frequently, always with smiles too tight to feel real. Their eagerness felt like they were circling a prize, waiting for the right moment to snatch it. I did not react. Instead, I slipped into a quiet performance of frailty. I let my steps be slower, allowed moments of intentional confusion, and watched how carefully their expressions changed each time. They thought they were gaining control. They thought I was fading. That illusion became my shield. With Rosa's guidance, I created new trusts at separate banks and moved my assets where neither Ethan nor Claire could reach them, even with legal power. The process was complicated and draining, but the sense of safety it offered was the first solid ground I had felt in weeks. Still, fear shimmered beneath the surface. If Claire sensed what I was doing, things could escalate quickly. I noticed new patterns in her. She stepped outside for phone calls. Her eyes were restless, darting around as if she were being watched. She seemed torn between panic and determination. That tension deepened when Rosa discovered one last piece of information. Claire owed money to a notorious lending group called Legacy Loan, the kind that did not ask politely when payments were late. That debt was the final key that explained why she had fallen so deeply into Ethan's scheme. By the end of that week, something inside me had shifted. I was no longer just a mother trying to understand where things went wrong. I was a woman preparing for a fight I had never imagined would come from within my own family. If you're still watching, and the story has you on edge, drop number 3 in the comments so I know you're staying with me. Now, let's step into Chapter 4. I began my quiet campaign with more determination than confidence, clutching the tools Rosa had given me as if they were lifelines in a storm I could not map. The small recording pen sat neatly in my pocket, and the phone I kept hidden in my bedroom drawer felt heavier each day, as though it understood the burden of the truth I needed it to capture. What I had not expected was how quickly Claire and Ethan would grow cautious, as though they sensed a shift in the air. Every attempt I made to record their conversations seemed to slip through my fingers. They spoke less, watched more, and measured every gesture as if waiting for me to betray something I did not intend to reveal. One evening, at a dinner they had insisted on sharing with me, I tried to steer the conversation toward finances. Ethan leaned forward, the picture of charm, speaking gently about stress, aging, and the importance of simplifying responsibilities. I waited for him to show his hand, to suggest signing over authority or letting him manage something important. Instead, he spoke only in vague phrases that could have belonged in any magazine advice column. His evasiveness was intentional, and I could feel it like a door closing each time I got close to anything meaningful. Claire was different. She barely participated in the conversation, her eyes drifting around the room with a calculating sharpness that unsettled me. It reminded me of the way she used to scan the kitchen when she was younger, looking for the cookies I hid on the top shelf. Only now she was not searching for treats. She was searching for weaknesses. She moved from room to room with a manufactured casualness, lingering too long near drawers, bookshelves, and file cabinets. It was subtle, but I understood exactly what she was doing. I kept my own notes meticulously, as Rosa had instructed. Times they arrived, phrases they repeated, the way Ethan's tone shifted when he thought I appeared tired, the way Claire's voice sharpened when she felt I was more alert. But each time I tried to discreetly record them saying something tangible, Claire would suddenly walk in, or Ethan's expression would stiffen in a way that told me he felt the presence of danger. My first real failure came on a quiet afternoon when Ethan noticed the recording pen on the side table. I had forgotten to tuck it away after pretending to jot reminders to myself. He picked it up, turning it slowly, the way someone might examine an unfamiliar weapon. Panic rose in my throat, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I told him I used it as a way to remember chores and appointments, pretending that my mind had been slipping more frequently than it truly had. He nodded, but the suspicion did not leave his face. Later, I heard him telling Claire in the hallway, and the tension afterward was unmistakable. Claire began visiting unannounced, pretending to fuss over my health. Her questions were pointed, her gaze unwavering. It felt as though she was dissecting me, peeling back layers to find out what I knew. When she mentioned an evaluation of my cognitive health, a cold ripple ran through me. It was the first time she had been bold enough to say it aloud, and it confirmed every fear I had held quietly inside. My early efforts had not worked. If anything, they had made the situation more dangerous. I felt cornered and shaken by the realization that my daughter, the child I once carried on my hip, now viewed me as a problem to solve. But that despair lasted only a moment. Beneath it was a deeper, steadier force, something forged from betrayal and necessity. If my first attempts had failed, then I would simply need to be smarter. I would need patience, precision, and resolve stronger than the forces closing in around me. If you're still watching and the twists keep you hooked, comment number 4 to show you're still here. Now, let's continue with Chapter 5. The tension in the house had shifted from uneasy silence to something sharper, something with edges that scraped against my nerves each time Claire and Ethan walked into a room. They no longer bothered to soften their tones or disguise their impatience. Their conversations hovered close to commands, and the way they watched me carried the unmistakable pressure of a clock running out. I felt their urgency as clearly as the weight in my own chest, and every instinct warned me that whatever they had planned was drawing dangerously close. Claire was the first to say it outright. She announced that she had scheduled an evaluation of my mental state, framing it as a necessary step due to what she called increasing memory lapses and confusion. The way she said it, with a calm certainty that made the lies feel rehearsed, chilled me more than the actual words. She spoke as though she were describing a medical truth rather than an invention crafted to trap me. I felt like an animal being pushed slowly into a corner with nowhere to run. Ethan backed her with a confidence that bordered on excitement. He mentioned a doctor who owed him favors, someone who would understand the importance of documenting my supposed decline. There was a gleam in his expression that made my skin crawl, a look that told me he already pictured the outcome. It was as though the walls of my own home had turned into props for a play they had written behind my back. I tried to delay them, playing into the image of frailty I had been cultivating. I moved slowly, hesitated, and let my voice tremble just enough to appear overwhelmed. But something in Claire hardened. She stepped closer, her expressions less guarded and her tone colder than I had ever heard from her. Ethan took over the conversation, guiding it with a controlled force that made me feel as though I were being funneled down a single, unavoidable path. When they brought me to the office where the evaluation was to take place, I felt the air thicken around us. Ethan began weaving stories about moments that had never happened, insisting that I had forgotten names, misplaced objects, or repeated conversations. Claire added to the narrative with details that made my breath falter. Each claim painted a picture of a woman unraveling, and the doctor, standing nearby, looked as though he wished desperately to be anywhere else. His hands trembled slightly each time he lifted his pen, and he avoided my eyes with every question he asked. I realized he was not a villain, but a man caught in something he feared too much to resist. The knowledge did not comfort me, but it gave me one last thumb tool, the truth that someone in the room might listen if I pushed hard enough. So I dropped my own bombshell. I lifted my chin and stated that the entire conversation was being recorded. I added that Rosa was monitoring everything remotely and that federal authorities were aware of Ethan's activities. It was a calculated lie, meant only to slow their momentum, but it cut through the room with the force of a blade. Claire's composure cracked, her breath catching in a sharp, panicked sound. In that moment, a document slid from her bag and fluttered to the floor. When I saw it, the world seemed to tilt. It was a Do Not Resuscitate order, one I had never signed, carrying my name in handwriting that mimicked mine with terrifying accuracy. My heart lurched. This was not just about control of my finances. They had prepared for my death. Before I could move, Ethan lunged toward me. I saw his arm swing, something heavy glinting in his hand. Pain exploded across my temple, and the room shattered into blinding white. The last sound I heard was Claire's voice, sharp and furious, not with fear for my life, but with rage that their plan was unraveling right in front of them. When I regained consciousness, the world arrived in fragments. The sharp beeping of machines, the cold sting of antiseptic, and the muted glow of fluorescent lights all drifted toward me like scattered pieces of a memory I had not yet reached. My head throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache, and my body felt impossibly heavy, as though it had been poured full of wet cement. I blinked slowly, unsure of how long I had been gone or how close I had come to never returning at all. A nurse appeared at my bedside, her expression hesitant and gentle. She explained that I had been brought in with a severe head injury, unconscious and bleeding, my breathing shallow. She said the doctors were not certain whether I would recover fully. I tried to speak, but the words tangled somewhere between my mind and my throat. Closing my eyes, I reached for what had happened, searching for the last thread before everything had gone dark. I found flashes instead. Ethan's arm raised high, the sudden shock of pain, Claire's voice sharp with anger rather than fear. Those shards of memory drifted like broken glass through the fog inside my head. Later, Claire entered the room, her steps light and her expression composed in a way that made my skin tighten. She sat in the chair beside me, leaning forward with the kind of concerned posture she had perfected long before all this began. She spoke softly, but there was a note beneath her words that betrayed her real purpose. She asked whether I remembered anything. She mentioned that the doctor believed my recovery might be incomplete. She said these things as if they were observations, but I understood the truth behind them. She needed to know whether her world was still intact or whether it had already begun to crack beneath her feet. I knew instantly that showing clarity would be dangerous. If she believed I remembered the attack, she might try again, or she might find another way to finish what she and Ethan had started. So I let my gaze wander unfocused. I moved my lips without forming full words. I pretended to be caught somewhere between waking and drifting. Claire watched every detail closely, as though she were studying a specimen. Her uncertainty was the only protection I had left. As she continued speaking, I felt a sudden jolt of memory. The recording pen. It had been tucked inside my purse. If it had survived, it held the most important evidence of my life. But my purse was no longer in my room. The nurse had mentioned that my personal belongings had been stored in the hospital's secure area due to the circumstances of my arrival. I felt a surge of panic beneath my ribs. If Claire or Ethan reached it first, everything I had endured would be for nothing. That fear sharpened when a hospital security guard quietly informed me, while Claire was briefly out of the room, that someone had attempted to access the secure storage without authorization. The person had been turned away, but the description matched Ethan too closely to dismiss. He knew I had something. He just did not know what. When Claire returned, she carried a stack of paperwork. She placed them at the edge of my bed. I recognized the layout immediately. Legal forms intended to establish mental incompetence. She spoke calmly, suggesting these were necessary for my well-being, that I needed help managing my affairs. I could feel the walls closing around me again, and I understood that this moment required a choice. If I fought openly, I might survive the day, or I might not. If I continued with the illusion, I could buy time, gather strength, and assemble allies. I chose silence over confrontation. I let my head drift sideways as though her voice floated past me. I whispered a single indistinct phrase, just enough for her to believe my mind was slipping. Her relief was almost visible. When she finally left the room, I opened my eyes fully for the first time, the clarity sharp and unwavering. I understood now that survival would depend not on strength, but on patience. The real fight had only just begun. If you're still watching and your heart is racing from everything unfolding, comment number 6 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move into chapter 7. The days that followed seemed to stretch into a slow, heavy blur, as though time itself had thickened around me. I drifted in and out of sleep, the ache in my head pulsing like a second heartbeat. Every sound in the hospital carried a strange sharpness, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the distant rattle of carts in the hallway, the soft murmur of nurses exchanging notes outside my door. My thoughts felt scattered, suspended between the fog of the injury and the clarity I was careful to hide. Whenever footsteps approached, I let my eyes dull and my face relax into the expression of someone unsure of where she was or how she got there. The doctors spoke cautiously when they updated me. I learned that the blow to my head had caused a significant brain injury and that full recovery would take time. Their words should have frightened me more, but there was a dark irony in the situation. The very damage they described, memory gaps, disorientation, slow processing, was the same picture Claire hoped to paint for the legal system. In their eyes, I matched the portrait perfectly. That illusion, painful as it was, offered me a strange kind of shield. Claire continued to visit every day, carrying flowers or a small bag of fruit, as though she were performing for an invisible audience. She spoke with gentle concern, leaning close as she asked whether I had slept well, whether I needed anything, whether I remembered the events before my fall. She always asked that last question in the same careful way, as if she were testing the depth of a pool before stepping in. Her eyes, however, betrayed her. Behind the softness, there was a sharp, alert tension, a constant calculation of whether I remained a threat. I answered her with drifting phrases, half-formed words, and long pauses that made my mind appear slow. I let my gaze wander off to distant corners of the room whenever she attempted to press for details. Each time I did, I watched the relief ease across her features. It was a strange sensation to see my own daughter relax at the thought that I remembered nothing. That relief cut deeper than any physical pain. But beneath my act, another fear gnawed at me. The recording pen, the single piece of evidence that could rip apart their lies, remained locked in the hospital's secured storage. If Claire or Ethan found a way to access it, everything I had endured would be for nothing. I felt the weight of that small device like a stone in my chest. One afternoon, a security guard stopped by under the pretense of checking on patient belongings. He spoke carefully, ensuring no one else was nearby, and informed me that someone had attempted to enter the storage room a second time. This time, the intruder carried a forged authorization letter. The description he gave was vague, but the implication was unmistakable. Someone connected to Claire had tried to retrieve my possessions, and they were willing to create fake documents to do it. The danger was tightening around me, not loosening. In the quieter hours, when the lights dimmed and the hallway settled into nighttime stillness, the emotional weight of the situation sank into my bones. The betrayal of family is something that does not land all at once. It unfolds in waves, each one revealing a deeper cut. I replayed moments from years earlier, birthdays, holidays, laughter at the dinner table, and felt a sharpness in my chest as I realized those memories no longer held the same shape. The people who should have been my protectors had become the architects of my harm. A hospital administrator eventually appeared to discuss my long-term care. She mentioned the possibility of transferring me to a specialized recovery unit. I nodded weakly, pretending to struggle with her explanation. Inside, however, I recognized an opportunity. A transfer meant new staff, new routines, perhaps a moment where I could contact Rosa or reach a phone without Claire watching every breath I took. Later, as the sun dipped low outside my window, I stared at the fading light and let a steady resolve settle inside me. Claire and Ethan had not expected me to survive. My survival alone ruptured their plan. They had tried to erase me, but I remained. And as long as I lived, their victory was incomplete. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one truth had crystallized through the pain. Recovery would not be the end of this fight. It would be the beginning of my return. When they transferred me to the rehabilitation wing, the change in atmosphere was immediate. The hallways were quieter, the lighting softer, and the staff moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. It felt less like a place where people were fighting for survival and more like a place where they learned how to live again. For me, it was something entirely different. It was the first environment since the attack where Claire did not appear every few hours, and that absence gave me room to think, breathe, and plan without her shadow trailing behind me. My days began with short walks down the hallway, supported by a therapist who kept his voice gentle and steady. Each step was a reminder of the pain still lingering in my skull, but also of my will to push forward. I tested my memory by reading small passages from pamphlets or reciting tasks the nurses asked me to remember. Beneath the fog of healing, I sensed my clarity returning in small, stubborn sparks. I kept those sparks hidden whenever anyone watched too closely. Whenever staff entered the room, I slipped back into the persona I had created, the dazed woman struggling to piece together her surroundings. I let my voice waver. I paused before answering simple questions. I allowed my hands to tremble slightly as I reached for objects. Maintaining that illusion felt exhausting, but it was a necessary mask. If Claire believed I remained fragile and confused, she would continue to underestimate me. I needed that underestimation like oxygen. One afternoon, I managed to find a small pocket of privacy. I pretended to ask for the therapy schedule, but instead reached for the hospital phone. My fingers, still unsteady, dialed the number Rosa had drilled into my memory earlier in the investigation. The call connected, but I heard only a single ring before I lost my nerve and left a brief message. I could not risk a longer conversation. Even so, my heart slowed when I later received word from a nurse that a friend had sent a message wishing me strength. I knew that was Rosa's way of letting me know she had heard me and was now watching the situation from outside. The thought of the recording pen never left my mind. Knowing it was still locked in the hospital's secure storage made it feel both safe and vulnerable at the same time. That pen held my survival, and I needed to reach it before Claire or Ethan found a way around the guards. I began studying the staff schedules, noting who passed by each hour, which guards were strict, and which ones were more relaxed. My weakened state turned into an unexpected advantage. No one looked twice at an elderly woman moving slowly and quietly. There were moments when emotion caught me off guard, especially when I remembered the forged Do Not Resuscitate order with my name on it. The idea that my own daughter had been willing to end my life on paper long before Ethan swung the weapon was a wound far deeper than any bruise on my skin. Yet that wound was also the source of a growing strength inside me. I was no longer fighting simply to survive. I was fighting to reclaim my dignity. One of the therapists, Michael, seemed to sense something unspoken in me. He did not question it. Instead, he offered small kindnesses, drawing the curtain a little further, stepping out a bit longer during my rest periods. His quiet respect gave me room to plan in ways no one else noticed. As the days passed, my steps grew steadier, my thoughts sharpened, and each night before sleeping, I looked at the visitor log near the nurse's station. On the evening I saw Claire's name scheduled for the next day, a calm resolve settled over me. My time was running out, but so was hers. Tomorrow, everything would begin to turn. If you're still watching and you need to know how this all ends, comment number 8 below, so I know you're still here. Now, let's step into the final chapters of this story. At last, after days of quietly waiting for the right opening, I managed to speak directly with Rosa. The call was brief, but it carried the weight of everything I had endured. I explained what little I safely could, and she understood immediately. Within hours, she arrived at the hospital with an investigator, both of them determined to secure whatever remained of my personal belongings before Claire or Ethan could reach them. The security office confirmed everything Rosa feared. Someone had tried twice to enter the locked storage room, once with forged authorization. My purse was retrieved, and inside it, untouched, was the recording pen. Seeing it placed carefully into Rosa's hands felt like watching a trapped bird finally be set free. That small piece of plastic carried the truth I had nearly died trying to protect. The investigators worked quickly. They copied the audio and forwarded it to the authorities. Hearing the familiar voices replayed in the sterile room felt unreal. Ethan's tone dripping with calculation, Claire fabricating symptoms, the doctor's uneasy cooperation, and the rising tension before the attack. All of it was there, clear, undeniable. Ethan was arrested that same afternoon. The officers informed me that he had been under soft surveillance since attempting to infiltrate the security room. The charges stacked against him seemed endless: assault, fraud, elder abuse, forgery. The weight of them felt like justice slowly knitting itself together. Claire tried to deny everything when she was summoned. She blamed confusion, manipulation, fear, anything she could grasp. But the forged Do Not Resuscitate order, The recordings and her repeated attempts to gain control over my medical decisions told a different story. She could not outrun the truth she helped create. The hearing was painful. Sitting upright in my wheelchair, I felt every bruise and every memory. Claire stared at me with a mixture of fear and resentment. Rosa spoke with clarity, laying out the timeline of betrayal. When it was my turn, I chose my words carefully, describing the heartbreak of realizing my own daughter had tried to end my life for money. I did not ask for harsh punishment. I only asked for protection. The judge denied both Claire and Ethan's request for release. As I left the courthouse, the sky looked clearer than it had in months. Justice was finally beginning to take shape. In the quiet that followed the chaos, I often found myself sitting near the window of my restored home, letting the morning light spill across the floorboards. The silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the soft steadiness that arrives when a long storm finally breaks. I had survived more than betrayal. I had survived the moment my own daughter decided my life was worth less than money. Now, I was learning how to breathe again. I thought of Claire more often than I expected, not with rage, though the echo of it still lived somewhere inside me, but with a kind of mournful distance. I had given her everything a mother could give, and she chose to turn that love into an opportunity for greed. Accepting that truth was its own kind of grief. Yet acceptance was also a form of release. I no longer carried the weight of trying to understand her choices. Some people choose their shadows, even when the light is within reach. As the days passed, I came to see my survival as a lesson in vigilance. Age does not strip a person of intelligence or value, but it can make us convenient targets. I learned the importance of protecting my autonomy, of keeping control of my finances, of ensuring that trust is earned rather than assumed. The world is not always kind to older women, but we are not fragile unless we allow ourselves to be. The money Claire tried to steal is now serving a better purpose. Through the foundation, it supports people who once stood where I stood, frightened and betrayed. In that sense, her cruelty planted the seed of something meaningful. I reclaim more than my life. I reclaim the right to shape its legacy. Every evening, I step out onto the porch and breathe in the warm air, grateful for the simple truth that I am still here. My story is not a tragedy. It is a reminder that even when betrayal comes from the closest place, the strength to rise must come from within. In the end, survival is rarely just about escaping danger. It is about reclaiming the quiet places inside ourselves that betrayal tried to steal. When trust is broken by those we thought would protect it, we are forced to confront a difficult truth. Love is meaningful, but dignity is essential. The journey forward comes from choosing clarity over denial, strength over fear, and purpose over bitterness. Healing does not erase the wounds, but it teaches us that even the deepest cuts can shape a wiser, steadier heart. And sometimes the most powerful legacy we leave is the decision to rise when someone else hoped we would fall. Thank you for staying with this story until the last word. If it moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of your own strength, feel free to share your thoughts below. Do not forget to follow and subscribe. Your support helps every story find its voice.